Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to start by joining the colleagues who came before me and express appreciation and thanks to the Almighty for giving you the strength and the focus and the belief to have been elected and join this honorable house. And to thank my own family and friends for all the support that they gave. It's in times like these you really know who your friends are. And you know who are the persons who pretend and persons who say things because they don't know you and judge you. And Madam Speaker, like those before me that have been elected and lost and re-elected, campaigns are really a learning experience. It tests your character. So I'm pleased, Madam Speaker, to address this debate as the duly elected parliamentary representative for Castries South. I am pleased, Madam Speaker, because I am a product of Castries South. I was born there and I was raised there. It nurtured me to become the person that I am today. I have no shame in saying I was born and raised by the bridge, and I am of and from Castries South. Madam Speaker, please give me the latitude to say a few things before I directly address myself to the estimates, because I notice, Madam Speaker, that you've been a very tolerant presiding officer. And despite our own exchanges, Madam Speaker, I have tremendous respect for the chair. Madam Speaker, I am immensely grateful for the support given to me from the constituents of Castries South and the continued support since the general elections. It was a general elections characterized by the most vicious character assassination and smear tactics. But, Madam Speaker, while some may rejoice in this approach to our politics, there is a majority, sometimes silent, sometimes overlooked, that detests such politics. Our youth want a different politics. They want a politics of hope, of aspirations, of decency, and of decorum. Madam Speaker, I had a team that insisted that we would have a political campaign that was different, one never seen before in the political life of St. Lucia. I trust that I lived up to the expectations of my team and the youth of St. Lucia. But the Madam Speaker, elections is done. The people have spoken. I did not come in with a track record of performance as a rep. I had to present myself as I am. Someone who started in the student movement, in the youth movement, who went to university, who always tried to do well. And whenever I was given a task, to do it with excellence. But, Madam Speaker, I will, Madam Speaker, stand here and say to you that as the parliamentary representative for Castries South, I have to represent all, be it SLP, UWP, or no P. I have to represent everyone. It is not an easy task in the present political setting with communities more tribalized, more politicized, and more fearful than ever. I have a simple request for all the constituents of Castries South, that we should not allow the culture of division and intimidation which has been engendered in our country to destroy our dreams of a better community. Instead, we should muster our collective efforts in pursuit of a constituency characterized by harmony and community empowerment for its development. I promise, as I did during the campaign, I will serve all, regardless of which party a person supports. I am not a person of political tribalism, and I will never be. Madam Speaker, ask anyone who's worked with me, Department of Youth and Sports, West Indies cricket, Cricket World Cup, World T20, whether I have ever practiced political tribalism. The Honorable Minister for Local Government, she was operations manager, and we ran Cricket World Cup together. And she can tell you all the discussions we had about politics, and ask her who was my right hand. Her politics did not matter then. And I've been chastised many times because some of my close friends are members who support the opposition. But that does not matter when somebody has to work and work in the best interest of this country. I care about performance. I care about people working as expected. And then politics and the party affiliation comes second. And in the same way, my constituency office is open for any and every constituent to walk in and to see me. No one will ever be turned away. So I promise my team in the campaign, and I promise my constituents, that I will never boast and beat my chest of how I defeated an opponent. I will not treat political opponents as enemies or call people nasty names and try to destroy their reputations. Because like my colleague said last night, that's not me, and that's not my politics. But Madam Speaker, I will always confidently and purposefully represent my constituency. I will strive with all the ability I have to hold the government to account, not through insinuations, but through thorough examination of the facts and asking them the hard questions. That's how it should be done. All my life, I have known to do it one way, and that is through hard work and perseverance. That when given a job to be done, you do it well. I have carried that with me through the University of the West Indies, Cambridge University, London School of Economics, McKinsey, ICC, WICB, and the High Commission in London. And Madam Speaker, I will not allow the honourable member to distract me for a simple reason. It is because I believe he suffers from a persistent ideological backwardness, Madam Speaker. I will answer him, Madam Speaker, when he can go out in public and say all the things Richard Frederick said about him is untrue, and go on Richard's program, sue Richard, and defend himself. Until he can do that, I have nothing to say to the honourable member, because I am focused on doing what has to be done. And Madam Speaker, I know, Madam Speaker, I'm a marked man in many respects. I know that. I am a marked man. But I hold no fear. You see, Madam Speaker, I was forged on the anvil of struggle and survival, so I know persecution. I was molded in the fire of resistance of the youth and student movement, so I know victimization. I will not be broken by threats, email and phone hacks of vindictiveness. I was not broken as a young man growing up on the bridge, not far from here, and I will not be broken now. I know persecution, Madam Speaker. I have faced it from the UWP. I recall the days as a leader in the youth movement, the NYC, year after year applying for a scholarship to go to university, coming out #1 on the interview list, and never getting a scholarship. Never. And I promised myself then, and I do now, I will never be part of doing that to any young person in St. Lucia, regardless of the political party they support. Madam Speaker, we wonder about the treatment of the National Trust. The National Youth Council was banned because it criticized the government of the day. There is something in the DNA of some people in the United Workers' Party that believe if you do not succumb to them, they must destroy you. Madam Speaker, if you ever watched Star Trek, you probably would have heard and noted what they call the bog. Assimilate or annihilate. If you cannot give in and become a bog, you must be destroyed. That is in the DNA of some, not all. Madam Speaker, I'll be very quick to tell you, I will never accuse every honourable member on the other side. Some of them, I've known them many years. And I'll tell you, Madam Speaker, the person I've known the longest in this honourable house is the former Prime Minister and Minister of Infrastructure. We actually formed a youth club together way back in the 80s. I was 16 then, he was about already 30 years old. But Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, there are other members of this House I've known for many years that have never spoken an unkind word to me, and I don't think they will speak an unkind word. But there are some deep in them, they believe it is okay to be nasty. They believe it is okay to treat people badly. But Madam Speaker, that's their style. That's their style. It's not my style. And I will always believe, Madam Speaker, in being strong and resolute. So, Madam Speaker, as I address this Honourable House on the estimates of expenditure and revenue for financial year 2017-2018, I wish to focus on 4 questions. Are there any benefits to Castries South? Yes. Does the figures truly reduce taxes and deliver on the election promises of the ruling party? Is it a deficit budget, and does it pass the test for fiscal responsibility? And fourthly, is there any borrowing in those figures? Yes. Now, Madam Speaker, yesterday, my dear friend and the member for Shrewsbury Saltibus started to say something about FICA's plans, and he spoke about caca, I think it was. Madam Speaker, for a while, I almost got a Batman chair, a heart attack. But I thought the honourable members calling the budget a caca budget. But he wasn't. But I thought so, because describing it as a caca budget probably says a lot of what it is. But, Madam Speaker, let us proceed. On the surface, Madam Speaker, there is little in the estimates for Castries South. I searched every page for a mention of a community in Castries South. There was one, Madam Speaker, on page 479. The capital expenditure of the Department of Infrastructure states a sum of $655,426 for resurfacing of the Cicero Main Road, a project which was completed in early 2016 and for which a payment must be made. Madam Speaker, I looked, and I'm very glad the Honourable Minister is walking in at this precise moment. I looked for any allocation for the rehabilitation of a side road in Goodlands, a road which was started by the previous parliamentary rep under the CDP, and he stopped right at the residence of a former candidate and former Attorney General, Rudolph Doddy Francis. But beyond there, the road is absolutely terrible. And I've spoken to, I said, the former parliamentary rep, started it under the CDP. And that's to show the magnanimity of members on this side. And of course, he took a lot of criticism for it. But I've spoken to the Honourable Minister about continuing the road all the way to the end, because the road is in a mess. And there are certain members of this House, I know, that do frequent the area and they can testify to the condition of the road. Madam Speaker, I look for the rehabilitation of the Bassa Joseph Main Road. Madam Speaker, the residents of Bassa Joseph will this weekend put money together and have a kudme to put concrete to fill in the potholes on the main road. That is how bad it is. And Madam Speaker, I look for the rehabilitation of the Marigot Main Road. Marigot is a premier tourism location in St. Lucia. And I'm not saying anything about tourism today, Madam Speaker. I will deal with it in the next debate that we have. So in this vein, Madam Speaker, I wish to appeal to the Minister of Infrastructure to treat those roads as urgent. And under the headings of reconstruction and rehabilitation of roads, and the heading of secondary and tertiary road rehabilitation, if he can at least provide some relief to the residents of Bassa Joseph, Goodlands, and Marigot. Madam Speaker, I look for mention of a construction of a court for the youth of Fuasho, the resurfacing of the Cicero playing field, and the completion of the Marigot playing field. Madam Speaker, Fuasho needs a court. The young people in Fuasho are playing on the road. This road is actually the main road to the hospital. The ambulances, all emergency vehicles traverse on that very road. It is a hazard. The last government acquired the land and the property on the land, and the court was designed by the agricultural section. I hope, Madam Speaker, that there can be some relief to the young people of Washoe and Akotbi Builds. Madam Speaker, there was already agreement to resurface the Cicero playing field. It's a very small field. It cannot take 11 aside. And Madam Speaker, it has not been done, and I want to appeal to the Minister to give it some consideration. And Madam Speaker, the Marigo playing field was 95% finished by June last year. It needed a final top dressing and rolling. Now I know the Minister has plans. I've spoken to him about it, and he's explained to me what his vision is and where he wants to go with it. But I want to appeal to him that it is 95% finished. It would not take more than a couple loads of sand to finish the top dressing and to just roll it off. It will not take away from the long-term planning of the ministry. Madam Speaker, the field is being taken over by wild grass, what's called pad pool. And when that takes over a playing field, it's almost doomed. Madam Speaker, I wish to appeal to the Minister to give some consideration. Under all the monies that we heard about last night in the National Lotteries Authority, because the previous Minister explained that almost every month, $500,000 in revenue is earned from the national lotteries. Now, if we calculate from June last year to this year, that's almost $4 million or more that would have been collected, or at least available for use by the Department of Youth and Sports. And I'm only repeating what I learned in this Honourable House, Madam Speaker, and I'm sure the Minister can always correct me if I am wrong. But in $450,000, Madam Speaker, surely $20,000 is not too much to ask for to finish the playing field for the young people of Marigo. Madam Speaker, I looked for some indication of how the constituency development program will be allocated. I suspect when the Honourable Minister speaks, and Madam Speaker, $18.6 million is allocated for the CDP this year, that he will provide more information on how it's going to be used. The two models that have been used for CDP, that used by the previous UWP administration and that used by the previous SLP administration. And Madam Speaker, we are waiting to know exactly how it is. The Minister did explain on public television that less emphasis will be placed on infrastructure and more on training people in the various communities. I wish to appeal to the Honourable Minister to consider that there are still huge deficiencies in the physical conditions faced by communities all over St. Lucia. This budget, like many budgets before it, is laden with provisions for training. So maybe we should still focus, Honourable Minister, maybe we should still focus on the infrastructural needs of the communities. If there is to be a shift in government policy, I appeal to the Minister to allow parliamentary reps to have a say in what training is needed, who should be trained, and who does the training. Because, Madam Speaker, we have training under multiple agencies in this budget. NAPS, under Social Development Fund, many other agencies already doing training. The one fund that has been used for infrastructural development, Madam Speaker, why should it be diverted to training as well? But that's another story for another day. Madam Speaker, I note an increase in the allocation for Solid Waste Management Authority on page 448. It increases from 1.7 million to 2.58 million. Madam Speaker, there is a chronic solid waste problem in some of the communities of Castries South. And Madam Speaker, recently I undertook a tour of Castries South with the mayor, I think he's now the CEO of the CCC, and a number of other officials, to tour Castries South with me, to show them the state of the communities in Castries South as it relates to solid waste. And I have asked, yes, Madam Speaker, in 10 months, all the programs have been abandoned. There was a program in place of caretakers for every part of the constituency. That has been stopped. Now, Madam Speaker, I am not here to fight or argue. If the government decided it wanted to have a different policy, that's its decision. That's its decision. But the fact is the consequence of that shift has been a tremendous increase in the solid waste problem. Well, I don't know if you can increase the problem, but there's a tremendous deterioration of the management of solid waste in the constituency. And I think if it was removed, it should be replaced with something else. And I am not chastising anybody for changing the policy or plans of the government, but the consequence is that the constituency is the poorer for it. Madam Speaker, through you I wish to say to the Honourable Member of Castries South is that Castries South needs a proud program. I know the allocation of 13.7 million, and I wish that the following communities be considered: Banan, Monlatok, and Goodlands. Madam Speaker, those of you who pass Banan by where the small playing field exists, you could look to the hill and see the houses on the hill. A few years ago, there was a landslide at the bottom of the hill. Madam Speaker, it's a disaster waiting to happen. I appeal to the Honourable Minister, and I'm available, and I'm sure when he comes to meet me, we'll discuss West Indies cricket outside of the public glare, and I'll educate him on cricket. Let us tour the communities. I want to take you to Banan and to show you what's happening in those communities. I want to take you to Monlatok, opposite the Governor General's residence, all the way down to the entrance to buy sandals. And the persons who live on the hillside, what they experience. Down to the bottom where the river exists. They've actually had a child who lost her life when the river rose. Let us tour it and for you to see the consequence of unplanned development. I want to take you to Goodlands. Well, and I'm sure I forgot to mention, Honourable Member, the former Prime Minister, former Minister of Finance, and member of Castries North is very well versed with Monlatok, and he can bear testimony to the need for some remedial work to be done in this area. I'm not suggesting anything unworthy about him. He'll simply raise in that area. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Goodlands.
What did you raise?
Madam Speaker, Goodlands. For years, Madam Speaker, there are families in Goodlands, Madam Speaker, who came as indentured servants just after slavery ended. And they've been on lands, Madam Speaker, and they still do not have title to it. There are people in that area. Half of Goodlands is represented by the member for Castries South East. And I invite him to tour Goodlands with me, Madam Speaker, for him to learn for the first time, Madam Speaker, the true sentiments of the people of Goodlands, Madam Speaker. They need help, and it's a very serious issue, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I was pleased last night to hear from the member for Grosili that the aftercare program will be continued and Fuasho and Cicero will remain. As I know now, it continues in Fuasho, but it has to be restarted in Cicero. This is a critical program, Madam Speaker. If you drive along the hospital road just after school and you see the number of young people on the streets, they came out of school and they're actually on the street recreating. The aftercare program keeps them in a controlled environment, enhancing their learning and keeping them focused on what are the critical ingredients for success in a difficult world. And to continue this program, Madam Speaker, as I look on page 403 and I see an allocation of $500,000, Madam Speaker, I trust Cicero and Fuasho will get its fair share. Madam Speaker, I am pleased also to hear of the Youth Empowerment for Life project on page 493, allocation of $3.2 million. And the Honourable Member said that he will provide more information in the policy debate. And I'm anxiously awaiting to hear what he's saying, because I support these programs, Madam Speaker. Unlike some people in this country that believe when you spend money on people, when you spend money on social skills, when you spend money on giving individuals greater self-esteem and a sense of identity is a waste of money, I don't think so. And Madam Speaker, that's a theme I will come back to at an appropriate time. Again, back to the member for Castries South East. Let me tell you, so much of what I need has to come from the Minister of Castries South East. I really believe we and I need to have that discussion about West Indies cricket. Madam Speaker, BNTF 7th and 8th program, $8.7 million and $2 million respectively. A road has been started in Goodlands, Lower Goodlands, crossing the river. There was not enough money to complete it. And I trust, Madam Speaker, that the Honourable Member will ensure that more monies are made available to continue the road and to bring greater relief to the people of Goodlands. I sometimes ask them, how do you go out and come back after 12 in the night, especially after having a good time? How do you cross the river? How do you even get to your homes? But work has started. It started under the previous government, and I ask that it be continued for the sake of the people of Castries South. Madam Speaker, the second question, and I'll move a little quicker, Madam Speaker. Does this estimate reduce taxes and deliver on the promises of the government? This was a government, when in opposition, that said taxes were bad in this country. This country was overburdened. It was stifling growth, and that they would dismantle the tax structure in this country, giving more relief and more space for business to thrive and for people to have more ching-ching in their pocket.
That's what we've done. Reduced that.
You've reduced VAT. But, Madam Speaker, can you ask the honourable member, what has been the difference? Have you seen any reduction in prices in the supermarkets? Ask any St. Lucian, ask any supermarket operator. Have there been any reduction in the prices? Madam Speaker, there was a promise that taxes would be removed. But do we see this in this budget? The previous members have spoken about the airport development tax, page 8, recurrent expenditure for the Department of Finance, an increase of $18.3 million, Madam Speaker. Can I ask you a question, Madam Speaker? If these monies are for the redevelopment of the airport, should they not be in escrow as against revenue in a consolidated fund? Can someone answer that question to me? And Madam Speaker, since the member for Ancillary is now the authority on the economy and its management, probably he can answer that to me. He can answer that for me. Madam Speaker, there is, I will deal with that in the budget, don't worry. Madam Speaker, increase in collection from excise tax on imports, page 8, of $17.4 million, an increase from $86.7 million to $104.1 million. Can I ask, Madam Speaker, is a new tax being introduced? What is the basis for that increase in the collection on excise tax on imports, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, in the budget, in the expected revenue, it shows that under CIP, the revenue for 2016-2017, Madam Speaker, was $5.9 million. $5.9 million. You would recall that the Honourable Prime Minister addressed this House in December last year and said that to date the CIP had collected only $6 million. Listen to me, Madam Speaker. Up to December last year, the CIP had collected only $6 million. And Madam Speaker, you could refer to Hansard, is the sitting of the House in December last year. But up to March this year, the budget estimate says only $5.9 million was collected. Madam Speaker, how long will we persist with this lack of transparency and accountability in the Citizenship by Investment Program? It is why, Madam Speaker, that the Prime Minister did not want a debate in this House on CIP. But no matter what the Prime Minister... You found out what?
We found out about Jafari from the British press, so you can't talk about that.
Madam Speaker, that's a very good one. He says they found out about Jufali in the British press. But Madam Speaker, if something was wrong with Jufali, launch a commission of inquiry. Don't talk, act. And you know what, Madam Speaker? Very soon the courts will decide on the Jufali issue. But I will tell you very soon, in this Honourable House, we will have a revelation on how many diplomatic passports have been given, to whom, and all the emerging stories about diplomatic passports and awards that have taken place. But that's for another time, Madam Speaker. And I hope the Honourable Member will not be shortened by the discussions that will come out on that day. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker,
and they have one surname.
Madam Speaker, how long will we persist with this lack of transparency and accountability? And at the right time, Madam Speaker, I said, it's a matter before the courts. So everything will come out, Madam Speaker. Because, Madam Speaker, people say things, and sometimes they need to know carefully what they're saying. And there's always a time of reckoning. And time and patience is all that it takes. Madam Speaker, under SSDF allocations, I heard the honourable member last night said that he was always against the NICE program. And he explained that the reason why he was against it was that he did not believe it should be standing alone, that there were savings that could be accrued from merging everything under SSDF. Now, on the side, Madam Speaker, I have shared my thoughts with the honourable member on the comments that he made. Madam Speaker, I believe if you're the Minister of Equity and Social Justice, you must always say things that promote community harmony and promote the integration of people in the communities. That nothing should be said which appears to be divisive or which appears to be tribal. And I've said so to the honourable member. Even if he believes it is true what he said, as the Minister of Equity and Social Justice, it probably should not be said. But, Madam Speaker, the Minister has said last night that he will be judged by his actions and not just his words. So I look forward to the actions of the Minister of Equity and Social Justice to show a manifestation of that belief in the concepts of equity and social justice. But the Minister, and listen carefully to his words, he did not agree to NICE because NICE should not be standalone, it should be under SSDF, and it could be more efficiently implemented there. And I asked him, do you agree with NAPS in the office of the Prime Minister? Because NICE was in the office of the Prime Minister, you disagreed if it had been located there. But in this budget, NAPS, do not answer, honourable member, I will answer for you. I know he does not agree with NAPS being in the office of the Prime Minister, Madam Speaker. Now, Madam Speaker, you notice NICE was $90 million in the budget and it was removed. But NAPS is replaced. Madam Speaker, NAPS is nothing new. The only difference between this NAPS and the NAPS that Kenny Anthony, as Minister of the Honourable Member for Beaufort South, when he presented his budget in 2012, he presented NAPS, N-A-P-P-S, National Apprenticeship and Placement Program. This one is NAPS. The government is taking a nap, a true nap, because this is not new, Prime Minister, Madam Speaker. Dr. Kenny Anthony presented in 2012 NAPS, National Apprenticeship and Placement Program. It's the same concept. You read it, and it is the same thing. Nothing new. So, Madam Speaker, 19 million was removed for NICE, but then 10 million is placed for NAPS, and home care gets 5.3 million under SSDF, a total of about 15 million. So, it's a social. I agree, Honourable Member, Madam Speaker, please tell the Honourable Member that I agree with him. We are on the same page. We believe those programs are needed. But Prime Minister will say more about NAPS, and then we will deal with it. The Minister last night, Honourable Member for Grosley, spoke of youth empowerment for life. In that same budget address, the Honourable Member for Beaufort South presented YEP, Youth Empowerment Program. It's a twisting and a refining maybe, but it is the same basic trajectory. So, Madam Speaker, can you let the Honourable Member know that I support his program in the SSDF? And my one disappointment so far, SSDF was located in Castries South, and the Honourable Member removed it, and he has placed it in Colony House on the John Compton Highway. And I will not say who owns Colony House. But I know there was a reason why it had to move from Castries South. But I am disappointed, because whenever I needed something, I could run down the road by SSDF office and speak to the officers. He's removed me. He's removed that luxury and that privilege from me. But, Honourable Madam Speaker, I will continue to call the Honourable Member and represent the people of Castries South. Madam Speaker, I cannot help but speak about the withdrawal of the grant to the National Trust. I refer to page 445, Agency 21. Madam Speaker, when I heard that the Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for Miko South, said on an international stage for the world to hear that our patrimony is measured by our credit rating, I said someone was making a parody of him, making fun of him. And I thought to myself, that was not very nice. But, Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister has demonstrated, the Minister of Finance has demonstrated through the removal of the grant to the National Trust that this is a vindictive and juvenile response to the opposition provided by the National Trust to the plans of the government. It is a vindictive Minister of Finance that cares only about credit ratings and not the patrimony of St. Lucia. The hills and valleys that our anthem speaks of which the National Trust ensures that they are maintained and sustained, that the Prime Minister loves to market for tourism, he's now saying do away with it, and he's removing the grant to the National Trust. Madam Speaker, I want it placed on record that I think the subvention should be restored to the National Trust. And Madam Speaker, in the policy debate, more will be said about the National Trust and its role in St. Lucia. Madam Speaker, I need to refer to the member for Roselle Saltibus that under the allocations for the Department of Commerce, the subsidy provision of $4 million was removed. And the Minister of Finance explained yesterday that it was removed because the price of flour and sugar and rice had fallen. Rice and sugar had fallen, so therefore the subsidy was removed. Madam Speaker, reflect on those words, that poor people in hard economic times are looking forward to the relief in price. And the Minister of Finance is saying, because there was a drop in price, they've completely removed the subsidy of $4 million. Madam Speaker, it means that the price of flour and rice will go back up, Madam Speaker.
No. Come on.
Madam Speaker, the same way it dropped and it rose and it dropped and it rose, it will rise again. And then you'll put it back again. Okay, Madam Speaker, let it be recorded in this House that the next time there's an increase in the price of those basic commodities, the government will start back subsidizing it. This is a promise made in this honorable House. But this is the same government who, when it was reduced by the previous administration, cried. The Prime Minister cried. Let me tell you, Madam Speaker, there are a couple of things about the Prime Minister. You may not like him, but you'll sit back and you'll say, what a quality he has. He says anything in any situation to suit any occasion, and he can cry on demand. He can cry on demand. The Prime Minister cried that there was a reduction in the price of flour and sugar. He literally cried on the subsidy. And then it hurt him. It hurt him. So, Madam Speaker, I need to ask the question. In these figures presented, the estimates, Madam Speaker, do you see a reduction in the price of rice, of sugar, of flour, of electricity, of water? There are no reductions, Madam Speaker. All the crying was shown, Madam Speaker. But you know, if you campaign on lies, you can only perpetuate your stay by lying more. But sooner or later, the lying catches up, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, the third question I want to ask. The third question I want to ask, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, I heard the member for Ancillary Canaries yesterday call the member for Castries' performance as mediocre. And he went on about being mediocre and mediocre. He's repeating it this morning. Madam Speaker, in life, you learn certain things about respect and decency and decorum. But let me just remind the honourable member, he stood up and he spoke in a debate on estimates. He never cited one heading. Instead, he presented a document better suited to the next debate. He did not even realize he had come to the wrong party. And he was dressed in a three-piece suit when everybody's wearing beach clothing. He did not realize that. But he calls the honourable member of Castries mediocre in his presentation. He cannot even realize for his own self that what he was doing was so misplaced. And some might want to call it mediocre at best. But, Madam Speaker, the member for Ancillary Canaries, we go back a long way. They're looking for him in Montciso. We go back a long way. We actually, the Sandals Cricket Academy, we started it many, many years ago. I'm sure he can recall that. So we've had a long working relationship. And my advice to him, Madam Speaker, is that he probably should pay a little more attention to some of the seniors in his party and solicit their advice and guidance as to how he should conduct himself in the House. Madam Speaker, but I want him to open his document on the estimates, himself and the member for Soufre, and let us proceed to do an examination. Because, Madam Speaker, I want to ask the question, Madam Speaker, whether these estimates pass the test for fiscal responsibility. Because this government, Madam Speaker, promised that it would never present a deficit budget. Never. The Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Senator Eubolus Raymond, said it over and over. No deficit budget. The Minister of Finance said it. No deficit budget. And I sat and I wondered whether my own understanding of what a deficit budget is was wrong. Because how are you not going to present a deficit budget in such trying economic times? And I said probably the Minister of Finance in the Ministry of Finance is a brilliant economist. But then I remember the member of Castries North once called him a bush doctor. So I really wondered whether or not this budget will be a test of whether he's an economic guru or whether he's a bush doctor. So we were a bush doctor, the member for Castries North. At that time, the honourable member was contested for the Solution Labour Party. but Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister stated that government must be run like a business, with himself as CEO. So, Madam Speaker, let us judge the figures presented by the CEO. And I want the member for Soufrière, and the member for Ansler Cambridge to open your pages, Madam Speaker. I think it is this the summary.
And you refuse, you're talking about everything, you're not talking about that.
Madam Speaker, Roman numeral 3, Madam Speaker. Roman numeral 3, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we need to ask the CEO / Minister of Finance, the member for Miku South, which business operates by reducing its income and increasing its operating expenses, as demonstrated in the estimates before the House. It reduces the approved estimates of 2016-2017 of $1.164 billion. Please look at the page, Roman numeral 3, summary sheet, to $1.158 billion for financial year 2017-2018. It means based on what was projected for last year, the Minister of Finance is predicting less revenue. But, and Madam Speaker, let me also point out, you will notice that for the turnout, less revenue was collected. But the Honourable Minister of Finance came into this House in December and told us that revenue collection was 102% to date, meaning it was beyond projected. If in December you were 2% more than what was projected, but by the end of March you are below end of year projection, what does that suggest? What does that suggest? It suggested there was a decrease in revenue collection in the latter part of the year towards the ending of the financial year. That's what it suggests. And make note, Madam Speaker. But the Minister of Finance, I want you to refer to the figures, right, is predicting a decrease in revenue from what was forecasted for the last budget, but an increase in expenditure. Is this how you run a successful business, Madam Speaker? But Madam Speaker, let us examine the 5 critical indicators which are presented to assess the fiscal responsibility of this budget. And let me just say, the Honourable Member for Castries never said that the economy was running beautifully and was a success. He never said that. He said there was an improvement in the economy. And Madam Speaker, the opening line of the Minister of Finance yesterday started by saying there was a marked improvement in the fiscal performance of the economy. The Minister of Finance said it yesterday. He said it. And I will prove it, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let's look at current surplus. Current surplus, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, government earns revenue from its normal functioning, from taxes, fees, licenses, user charges, etc. And this represents what we call recurrent revenue. The equivalent in a family, Madam Speaker, is a family earning money from salaries and from overtime worked. So that's recurrent revenue. But the government wants to spend on its normal activities and commitments, on wages, on salaries, on goods, on services, and transfers to other bodies. An equivalent is a family paying its bills and sending some money to a child who's at the University of the West Indies. So you collect all your money from your salaries and overtime, you want to pay all your bills, and send some money to your child who's in Barbados. Will the family be able to do this according to this budget? But let me also add, Madam Speaker, in that consideration, you're not repairing the roof, you're not repairing the fence, you're not paying your car loan, you're not paying your interest on the debt. In the concept of current surplus, Minister, hold on, you will come to it. In that situation.
Honourable Member, you have 15 more minutes within which to complete your presentation.
Thank you very much. I will finish, Madam Speaker. So, when you discuss in the concept of current surplus, the Prime Minister is already telling me no. All I'm doing is trying to explain that concept, Madam Speaker. The concept of current surplus is a very simple one. You earn your money through normal means. You do not pay your debts, the interest on your debts, and you have no capital expenditure. In that case, Madam Speaker, the government, according to the statement, has a surplus of $46 million. 46 million surplus. But remember, you've not fixed your house, you've not fixed the fence, and you've not paid your debts nor the interest, but you have a surplus of 46 million. You think that's bad, Madam Speaker, or it's good? Compare it to 81 million in 2015-2016, and expected 84 million for last year. So you move from 81 million in 2015-2016 surplus to 84 million for last year, to a projected surplus in those estimates of only $46 million. Any CEO who presents that will fail. And this Minister of Finance fails on the score of the current surplus. Let's look at the recurrent balance, Madam Speaker, and this is critical. Again, government earns its money from the normal functioning as stated. The same analogy for family. It earns its money from salaries and from overtime worked. But this time, government wants to spend on its normal activities and commitments, but also wants to pay its loan and its interest on its loan. If government does not pay its loan, then it will find itself in trouble, so it wants to pay it. But it does not build any road or fix any school. Similarly, a family wants to pay all its bills, but will also pay the house loan, car loan, and student loan, but will not fix the roof or the fence. According to this budget, the government is in trouble as it cannot do so. The government will be short by $78 million. So let me tell you it again. The government will be short in the recurrent by $78 million. And compare that, Madam Speaker, to the government short by $37 million in 2015-2016 and $37.2 million last year. Things are getting worse, Madam Speaker. The CEO fails again, Madam Speaker. The third one, the primary surplus, Madam Speaker. And all of that is on the summary sheet of the estimates, Madam Speaker. This time, Madam Speaker, the government decides that it will do all it can to earn as much money as possible, but it will not borrow. It will earn money as usual from its normal functioning, but it will also decide to sell some assets and obtain as many grants as it can. Similarly, a family will earn money through salary and overtime. They will probably sell a gold ring or a chain to make some money, sell a piece of land, and maybe ask the father-in-law or other family members for some help. But the government also wants to spend money on fixing schools, health centers, roads. But it will not pay its debt. It just wants to fix schools and roads. It will not fix its debt. Madam Speaker, under this budget, the government fails miserably again. This time, Madam Speaker, there is a deficit of $50.7 million. It is short by $50.7 million. In 2015, there was a surplus of $28.8 million, a surplus. And last year, it was expected to have a surplus of $120 million. But this year, there's a deficit of $50.7 million. There was money, Madam Speaker, last year to put towards debt. This year, there will be none. The CEO fails again, Madam Speaker. Then, Madam Speaker, let's look at the overall balance. And I want the member for Ancillary to go back to the summary page. You need to follow, Honourable Member, because you're the one chastising the member for Castries East. And you're not citing figures when you're chastising. Look at the figures.
We don't have the referral.
No, I'm not going to. Let me tell you. Madam Speaker, the overall balance. You must learn to say that outside. Again, this time, government decides for the overall balance, Madam Speaker, that it will raise all the money it can by whatever means, but it will not borrow. The overall balance, Madam Speaker, listen to that one, the overall balance. Madam Speaker, the government wants to spend on all its normal activities. It wants to repair all the roads in St. Lucia, all the schools. It wants to pay interest on loans, but it will not pay loans, principals, or refund citizens. Government still cannot do that under this budget. It is short by a whooping $220.9 million. Compare that to being short by $127 million in 2015-2016, an expected short deficit of $62.9 million for last year. Think about it, Madam Speaker. Under the overall balance, in 2015-2016, government was short by $127 million. It's expected last year that government would be short by $62.9 million. But under this estimates, government will be short by $220.9 million. Again, Madam Speaker, any CEO that presents those figures will fail before the Board of Directors. And my last, the fifth indicator, Madam Speaker, is there any borrowing? St. Jude's have nothing to do with that. Get serious. In this case, Madam Speaker, in this case, government will earn as much as it can for its normal functioning and sale of assets, and it will seek all the grants it can find. In other words, the government will do everything it can to raise money, Madam Speaker, because the government wants to spend on all its normal activities. It wants to waste money on consultants. It wants to waste money on excessive traveling. It wants to repair some schools. It wants to repair some roads. It has to pay its loans. And, Madam Speaker, in this case, this government, according to these estimates, will have to borrow money like never before in the history of St. Lucia. According to these estimates, government will borrow $345.4 million for this year alone. Compare that, Madam Speaker, to $246 million for 2015-2016, and expected for last year, only $183.1 million for last year. Things are really getting bad. But, Madam Speaker, let me tell you how bad it is. Let me tell you how bad it is. I quote from the Minister of Finance budget statement in May 2012, where he was responding to the previous 5 years of the United Workers' Party, under the stewardship of Honorable Stephenson King, the member for Castries North. And the Honorable Minister of Finance said then, over the past 5 years, the former administration borrowed a total of $949 million. That means over 5 years, borrowed a total of $949 million. Put in context, Madam Speaker, 949 over 5 years. This Minister of Finance will borrow in 1 year $345 million. The previous UWP administration under Stephenson King borrowed 949 in 5 years. This Minister of Finance, no, Madam Speaker, you know, I'm just about statistics. You know sometimes what the members do? They look at social and economic review, and they subtract 2016 from 2011, and they say that's what you borrow. That's net debt, because during that period, debt has been retired. So the net debt, if you look at, for example, Madam Speaker, how much was borrowed each year and you add it, and I can give you all the figures, Madam Speaker, $949 million was borrowed in 5 years. This Minister of Finance will borrow $345 million in his first year alone. This CEO, this Minister of Finance has failed in the estimates, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I end with the introduction of my presentation to the forthcoming debate on the policy statement. These figures suggest a Minister of Finance who thinks that St. Lucia is a lovely piece of real estate to be developed according to his whims, fancies, and some may add, the dreams of his father. But to do so, Madam Speaker, he must avoid a coup d'etat in his cabinet. So to make the detractors happy, he gives as much as he can, so they will be silent for the time being. Because, Madam Speaker, I'll tell you something. Of course we need economic growth in this country. Of course we need the stimulus in this country, Madam Speaker. And I think it was the member for Strozell who said, the Prime Minister saying he does not want to inherit what he does not want to leave what he has inherited. Every Prime Minister and member of Castries North will tell you that. You want to do everything to make the country as developed and as sufficient as you can, but you don't have the resources to do it, and you have to make difficult choices. You have to be able to give up some things, but in this budget, no tough decisions are made. Nothing is given up. This estimate, Madam Speaker, is putting St. Lucia on a slippery slope, Madam Speaker. If it works out, Madam Speaker, if for some reason this works, Madam Speaker, then we'll all have to apologize. But, Madam Speaker, if it fails, we have no choice but to go to the IMF. You are borrowing $345 million in 1 year. In 1 year. And yes, Madam Speaker, there are a lot of programs in here that I support, because I believe they can bring benefit to the constituents of Castries South and the people of St. Lucia. But this budget has no regard for the future of St. Lucia and where we are taking St. Lucia. It fails on every single fiscal indicator. It fails on every single one. It shows a deterioration of what the last 5 years of hard work, and the Labour Party paid the price in the elections for all those tough decisions that it took. There's an abandonment of that foundation for economic stability and sustainability that was laid by the last government. It was painful, but it had to be done, Madam Speaker. It was done to ensure that our future can be prosperous, that it can be prosperity in this land, Madam Speaker. And, Madam Speaker, thank you very much for the time that you've allocated me.